Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am diving into 4 watches as promised, the 4 pieces that we've gotten in that we're going to be going in depth into. I'm super excited to jump into these, as I always do with these videos. It's just going to be a brief overview for today. I'm going to give you just a little bit of a description of each of these pieces. I think they all have a very unique sort of history and a unique place in watch designs, and that's kind of why I really love vintage watches, because you can experience so many different styles of watches as you sort of go throughout your journey. So we're going to dive into each of these. I'll give you a brief overview of them. As always, we're going to have our in-depth videos and article for each of these pieces, so stay tuned for that. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Experiencing different types of vintage watches is probably the most important rule in collecting. Sure, there are some collectors who like to collect one specific reference or model, and it is completely acceptable, and even, I think, a pretty cool way of collecting. But for that individual to really know that they like that specific model that they want to collect, they have to have seen other models of watches to deduce that they really are wanting to focus on one specific model. Today we have 4 watches, each of unique design, complication, construction, and finishing, and I'm going to give a brief overview of each of them before we do individual videos for each of them, so stay tuned for those. But I wanted to give you an idea of what you're going to be seeing on Life on the Wrist going forward, both in our article form as well as in our video form. So we'll actually start off with the watch at the extreme right here. This is a really cool Longines with an interesting sort of dial variation. So dial variation is just one way collectors enjoy vintage watches, and this reference 1116 is a great example. The watch was manufactured in 1962 and has a 10-karat gold filled case made by Schwab Wuispard Case Co, based on the stamp that you can see at the top of the case here, where it says what the material of the case is and who produced it. The case is in pretty good condition with just a couple of scratches on the crown side here. The lugs are short and thin, so overall it makes the watch sort of wear maybe a little bit smaller on the wrist. What's really unique about this watch, though, is obviously the dial. So as you can see in this video, and I'll maybe zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. What you'll see on the dial of this watch is that the watch is made out of linen with gold applied hour markers, which is obviously a very unique way of producing a watch. You've got an applied Longines logo, printed Longines name, and it looks really, really cool. It's one of the hardest watches for me to photograph, though. Linen isn't the easiest to photograph. Nevertheless, a beautiful watch. It is a little bit darker over by the crown here, which makes sense because this is not a screw down crown. It is signed Longines with the Longines logo, but there's going to be some moisture that likely leaked into this side of the watch. Being from 1962, that is something that could happen. What's really cool is the gold case back of this watch is actually has an engraving with a dedication to JA Zonlick from your Stanley Associates 6/28/63. The inscription likely points to the sale and gifting of this watch in 1963 to a JA Zonlick from Stanley Associates that could have been based in Massachusetts, USA. I still need to do a little bit more research on who Stanley Associates is, but there are so many companies with that name, so it's going to be an interesting process of researching it. Overall, it's a really beautiful watch, and looks great on the wrist. We'll move on to our next piece, which is just next to the Longines, and that is this Gérard Perregaux reference 7742. Watches with alarm complications are an interesting part of watchmaking. Whether it's a Memovox from Jaeger-LeCoultre, the Cricket from Vulcain, or this reference 7742 from Girard-Perregaux. These watches were used to notify the wearer of a moment in time. Didn't have to be waking up, it could have been something different, but that is the purpose of these watches, before we had alarms on our phones. The watch dates the 1960s and has a stainless steel case, as you can see. It's 34 millimeters in diameter, so quite a typical sort of size for this era. The case is in good condition, and if you look at the lugs of this watch, you can actually still see some bevels on the inside of on the outside of the lug, where you see a little bit of a different look, which is nice. It gives the watch some added dimension, and in my opinion, this case has probably been lightly polished, but it's nice to be able to still see those bevels. The dial is obviously the unique feature in here, and it's for those patina nerds out there. It's aged to this sort of golden brown tone, which is either you love it or you hate it. I think that's the story with patina always, but this one especially. It's kind of got this chocolate brown, and with this darker strap, it really makes the dial stand out nicely. You've got your alarm complication down here at 6 o'clock. You've got your top crown to wind and set the alarm, your bottom crown to wind the watch so it runs. I'm not going to play the alarm. I'll leave that for the video where we, sorry about the focus there. I'll leave that for the video where we go in depth of this specific watch. So stay tuned for that. Another really nice sized piece. We'll continue moving towards the left and move on to this really cool Universal Genève. This Universal Genève is an important part of watchmaking. The competition to make the world's thinnest automatic movement was fierce. Universal Genève was victorious with this model. If I just turn it to the side, you'll see why. The watch dates to 1965 based on serial numbers, and has an 18-karat solid gold case that probably has been lightly polished, but you can still see a hallmark next to the crown. I'll try to get a shot here for you. You can still see a hallmark next to the crown there, so likely lightly polished, but still has a lot of the important features that collectors want for vintage watches. The dial is fairly well preserved with Roman numerals. It's called the Universal Genève Golden Shadow, which you see on the dial, and features an automatic movement. The lugs are long and sharp and make the watch actually sit quite nicely on the wrist. The watch houses the caliber 66 movement, which was the thinnest automatic movement created during this time, and for me, has one of the coolest complications. Yes, I said complications. That is a micro rotor. Micro rotors are essentially a smaller rotor that you have in the watch that doesn't take up the entire diameter of the watch, but takes up a smaller portion of the space for the movement. And for me, I think it's a really unique complication, one that I love because it's so beautiful to look at. I think I've uploaded a picture onto our Instagram if you want to check it out. It's so beautiful to look at, and obviously, with the watch so thin, it really accomplished the goals that Universal Genève had by producing this watch. As I mentioned, the long lugs basically make this sit a little bit longer on the wrist. But stay tuned for the in-depth look on this watch to see some more wrist shots. Our last watch is a really cool reference that I think has a lot of what the modern world is sort of looking at for watches in today's sort of collecting environment, and that is this Longines reference 727-S-724-40. So the dial of a watch is kind of what captures the attention of collectors, and I think that's exactly what you'll have with this with this specific reference. Complete with a guilloche finished outer ring of the dial, which you see at some of the hour markers on the dial of this watch. The watch sort of adorns these 4 diamond hour markers. The dial appears to be polished. If you look at the Longines signature, you can see that the G is missing certain features that you see on the Longines signature. So it probably has been polished in some fashion in its lifetime. The watch is cased in a 34mm case in solid 14 karat gold, which you can see at the top of the case there. You'll see the material and the case maker, who was Di Vincenzo and Arianetti, which was a Brooklyn-based case maker who manufactured the cases for brands like Longines, Omega, and Hamilton. The lugs are pretty sharp. If you look from a side view, you can see the lugs are extremely sharp, and if you look at the inside of the lug this time for this watch, you'll see visible bevels, which indicates that the watch has not been over polished, but likely has seen maybe a little bit of polishing in its lifetime. The watch houses the caliber 23 ZS manual wind movement, a highly respected and supremely finished movement. Again, the lugs are pretty long, so it sits quite nicely on the wrist. If you'll see if I can get this to focus for you, yeah, it sits a little bit longer on the wrist, which is quite nice. So those are the 4 watches. As always, we're going to dive deep into each of them. They each have sort of a unique look, a unique history, and so we're going to dive deep into each of the watches to give you an in-depth look at each of the pieces, their histories, the references, the movements, and possible provenance for some of them. For example, this Longines having the inscription on the case back. So stay tuned for those videos, and with that said, we'll close out the video. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at each of these 4 pieces. If I had a favorite out of these, it's very difficult to choose, but I have to say I really do love the patina on this Girard Perregaux reference 7742. The alarm complications is something that I personally have spoken about at length at Life on the Wrist. I do think it's one of the coolest complications you can get as a vintage watch enthusiast, so really love this 7742. I also have a special place for me, this Universal Genève Golden Shadow, just because the movement of this is fairly revolutionary, and I just love a micro rotor. I think they look so beautiful. Check out our picture on our Instagram of that of the movement, because it's definitely to die for. And as I said, we will have articles and videos for each of these pieces, so those will be the next videos that you'll see on this channel. So stay tuned for those. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this with a friend who might be interested in watches. Like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. That would be greatly appreciated by me. Let me know in the comment section below which one of these you like the most. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. With that said, guys, thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.